You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
You're listening to Fantha Tracks. Flip through the galaxy of literature. Welcome to Canon Fodder.
You're listening to Canon Fodder. I'm your host, Mark Newbold, and joining me today is artist Dan Tearle. Dan has done the artwork for the Celebration Japan 2025 collecting track, acrylic stand figures. Absolutely amazing representations of the original action figures from the 1970s. I had the chance to talk to Dan about these pieces of artwork and his own artistic process. So here's myself and Dan Tearle talking on Canon Fodder. So Dan, welcome to the show. Welcome to Canon Fodder. How's life with you? Keeping busy?
Yeah, very good. Very busy. Thank you. Yeah.
Looking forward to talking about this because you're somebody that, not only because proximity-wise we don't live a million miles from each other, but you're somebody that I've seen at shows like Echo Base. I've followed your artwork on Facebook and other sort of social media channels.
Yeah.
And now you're doing artwork for the collecting track at Celebration Japan 2025, which is a mega deal.
Very exciting, yeah.
How did that happen? How did that connection come to be?
Well, Chris got in touch with me, I would say, it was a few months back, with this sort of idea that he was going to be doing these, he wanted these figures drawing. And I wasn't really sure what he meant to be, I was like, he was explaining it to me. I was like, I don't really know what this is, but I think I can do it, And he gave me a list of figures that he wanted. And he also wanted me to do the artwork for the packaging. So, as you know, like the boxes have Darth Vader, Boba Fett, and C-3PO on there.
Yeah.
Just like the original Japanese boxes. And so I said, okay, we'll have a go. We'll see how it goes. It was kind of strange because he said that he'd followed my art for a while. People that might not know, my style is kind of like realism. And I use the airbrush a lot, and I try to get things really realistic, especially when I'm painting Star Wars figures. And he said, because of the scale of the boxes and the figures that were going to be, could I make them a bit less realistic and look a bit more painterly? Because otherwise, people are just going to think there's a photo on there.
Oh yeah.
And I thought about this, and I thought I'm going to have to approach this differently. And so, because of that, I did change the style a little bit. But I'll always try and get things realistic. I can't help it. It's just the way that I work. Some people are abstract and things like that, and that's great. But, I always try to get something realistic. So it was difficult to try at that scale to keep them painterly, if that makes sense.
Yes.
But I'm hopefully I pulled that off. And you can see that they're painted without them looking too abstract, if you see what I mean.
All artists' work progresses and improves and finesses and such. But even the earlier stuff that I saw, which is a few years ago now, I was like, is that just a figure stood on a background? It was a bit like back when in the Rebel Scum days when Kurto would set up the figures on the background and shoot them, and you were painting it. So where did your art journey begin? Because that's not a happy accident. That's something that develops finesses. You've got to find the right tools. How did you come to that place?
Yeah, I think with regards to the figures, what happened was, I started to get back into collecting again after years out of it. And I was looking at them, and at that time I was learning the airbrush more and using it more, and it was becoming more of the main tool that I use. And I thought, you can get some pretty realistic effects with the airbrush, obviously. And I thought, why not paint something that I love? I love Star Wars figures. Let's paint one and see what it looks like, and let's do it kind of like all those photos where it's just a study, like a still life of a Star Wars figure. Not a bowl of fruit, but let's do Darth Vader instead. I thought I'll have a go. And I'd seen some other people that had been doing it really well. And I thought there might not be a gap for me in there, but I'm going to approach it a little bit differently, do them in this kind of realistic style. And I had a go. And I kind of had a guinea pig where somebody said, one of my friends, Ken, asked if I could do a Luke X-Wing. And I thought, right, let's do it. I sat down one Sunday afternoon. I did it in an afternoon. And I thought, that doesn't look too bad. I was quite pleased with that. And it kind of just went crazy from there. And this was sort of like pre-AI. We're going back nearly 10 years now. So, and I made videos of me painting them and, went through my process and everything. It's a lot more difficult these days because without being big-headed, but like a lot of people just sort of like say, that's AI. They don't believe that you've done it. And I spend as much time now trying to prove that I've painted sometimes it's shocking. It's really difficult because it might be why I've gone more to this painterly style lately, because I was getting fed up with, you try and do something hyper realistic and people just accuse you of being a fraud, and it took the fun out of it for a bit. And I haven't painted many figures for a while, and that's one of the reasons, because every time you put something out, you get accused of using a computer, and it's not true.
No, absolutely not. No, absolutely not.
Hello, this is Jay Manchand. I'm a Star Wars Tops artist, and you are listening to Fantha Tracks.
I'm just curious, you mentioned painting the original figures, but how many of the original figures have you painted?
Oh, I did have a list at one time, but I would say that probably just over half, maybe getting on, maybe I'll get on for 2/3. Yeah, there's still quite a few that I haven't done. The problem is that when you sort of like, you was taking commissions for stuff, people obviously want the same figure. Yeah. And you've got your most popular ones always. So it kind of takes the time away from doing the ones that might be less popular. But the plan is one day to eventually do a whole run and then maybe release some prints of all of those and that sort of, that would be ideal. That's a time thing more than anything.
I would buy that T-shirt for sure, definitely. Now, doing this on the collecting track, there's this amazing lineage going back to Denver in '99 of Gus and the team doing the collecting track, and it's never missed a show all the way through to obviously the upcoming Japan show. How did you come to their attention? I mean, was it the fact that they saw your work on socials? Was it a referral from friends? You're known to the guys on the collecting track? So how did that all come to be?
I kind of shy away from, I don't look myself up or anything like that, and I don't really know how well known I am. But Chris had been following my work for a while, and as far as I know, it was just sort of like he needed an artist for it, knew that I did that sort of thing in the sort of style that he wanted, in colour and all that. And he got in touch with me that way. But it's quite surprising when I've seen comments and stuff. I mean, things like the collecting track, I didn't really know much about it or anything until recently. Didn't realise what a phenomenon it is now. And I think even going into the project, I didn't realise how big, the whole thing is. Would I have approached it differently had I known? I don't think I would, because I kind of worked it out as I went along that, he kept saying to me in messages like, this is going to be big. And I'm like, okay, right, I'll take your word for it. I don't know. Because I really was I didn't know much about it. I'll be honest, I really didn't.
You're part of a seriously important part of Star Wars collecting history now. So I think it's just, I've been sitting online and seeing you at places like Echo and seeing you at shows around the place and hopefully seeing you at Echo again at the end of the month.
Certainly will, yes.
When I saw it was your name, I was like, whoa, this is fantastic. Such a cool thing.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video and social media feeds, bookmark fanthatracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
Now, as this episode comes out, the team over at the collecting track will have revealed 2 figures, and there are 2 in the 3PO. Yep. So when you were given the brief, you were asked to do 14 figures and the box art. So where does an artist start with that? Do you pick the characters that you like the most, that you want to dig into the most? Do you just go, well, I know that Boba Fett and Stormtrooper are the first 2 figures being released, so I'll start there. Where do you start with all of that?
Actually, with this one, I started with probably the more difficult ones first. Get those out the way, as it were. And with figures, when you're painting figures, the hardest ones are always anyone that's like got a human face, because at the scale that Star Wars figures are, obviously they're not full of details and features. No. And trying to sort of bring that across, it can be difficult. So you have to sort of think about, well, we need a bit of extreme lighting and to sort of highlight whatever few features there are there. One like C-3PO and R2-D2, I always find those the easiest. They're pretty simple. And a lot of people say C-3PO must be difficult because like he's backplated and everything.
Yeah.
But you've got to trust it with that. And when you're painting that particular figure, you'll look at it at times and think, how do you make sense of it? Because there are so many different sort of like reflections.
Yeah.
But it does always come together. You have to trust it and it comes together at the end.
And when you're painting, let's say 3PO is a great example. R2 less so because there's less of that sort of foil effect. But on 3PO is fully plated. Are you painting from the figure in a consistently lit place, or are you painting from reference photographs? How do you do that?
What I do, I literally photograph my own figures. I've got like one of those little light box things.
Yeah.
So you've got that white background. So the lighting is exactly how I want it. Take a few pictures, pick out one that I like the best. They have a photo shoot and then I paint them. This is like, they're my models.
Literally.
Yeah. So literally most of the figures that I paint, unless somebody wants their own figure painting because it's personal to them and they'll send me a picture of their figure, they're usually my figures that I've used as models. Yeah.
I mean, we've posted a couple, and now 3 of these weeks, if you like, on Fantha so far. And obviously the box is the box, but the figures are consistently posed. So did you have to work out what angle you take your images from? And so there's a consistency there as well?
Yeah. Chris was quite specific with the poses. They had to be arms down, no sort of like holding the weapons up simply because of the styling of the cutouts that he was going to use. No extreme sort of shadows or anything, just well lit to highlight the features of the figure. But yeah, it was like arms down, weapons down. We had to do them that way, which was no problem at all.
When you paint them, what scale are you painting them? Sort of 1-to-1 or different scale?
No, this was difficult as well because they're bigger than 1-to-1. I would say they're probably about 2.5 to 3 times the size of a figure, maybe. Usually, when I paint a figure, I do them much bigger. But because of time constraints and the fact that obviously they were going to be reproduced for the packaging, one size, they only needed to be just a little bit bigger and then scanned in at a high resolution. And then Chris and his team could scale them down without any loss of quality. So I didn't have to do them huge. It would have took me a lot longer to do.
And how long did you have? I mean, I understand you had to get a click on because just the whole process and approvals with Lucasfilm and everything else. But what sort of timescale were you working to?
I can't remember when Chris first got in touch with me, but it was one of those things where I didn't hear from him for a bit. And I thought, you get a lot of projects that just sort of, they have great ideas and they never actually really take off. But then we started talking about it again. And I said, well, let me put a couple together because I was behind. I was incredibly busy with other stuff like the cards and all that sort of thing. But then we sort of jumped into it and it got to a point where I was doing like 2 or 3 over a weekend and we started to whiz through them quite quickly then. I got quite a good rhythm, but I could only do 2 or 3 at the weekends when I wasn't at work, that sort of thing. But yeah, it picked up pretty quickly and it went really smoothly in the end.
The concept is a great concept and having them as these acrylic sort of versions of the figures looks amazing. When did you first see a mock-up of how it would look? And did it feel real then when you kind of got it in front of you?
Yeah, it was a big revelation because then when Chris showed me a mock-up, I mean, I hadn't painted a figure by then, but he showed me a mock-up and I still wasn't quite sure, is this just a backing to something else? Or, I didn't realise that the figures that I were painting were sort of like the main features of it. But I understood it then. And I thought that they look amazing. They look really cool. That's when he showed me a mock-up, and it was basically, it wasn't one of my paintings. It was just a picture of I think it was a stormtrooper he used with the box made up, but still with photos on it from the original package, that sort of thing. And he said, "Want you to paint the box art as well." And I was like, "That's like 3 paintings, which they're quite detailed because they're off photos." And I thought, okay. Right. And I think I did those first, actually. I did the 3 box pictures before the figures.
This is Matt Ferguson, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
Quick question that just occurs to me. Han Solo came out last week.
Mm-hmm.
How did you, or was it chosen that you would do the larger head Han or the smaller head Han? I'm just thinking, if this ever goes in the future, you're going to do Lando with the teeth or not with the teeth. Yeah. How did they get chosen?
I asked Chris before everyone. Before I started each one, I said, can you just confirm to me, what head do you want for Han? And we sort of like, we cleared all that up before I sort of like penciled it out. And so I just asked him for each one if there was anything specific he needed that particular figure to be, what variant or whatever.
And going back through the history of the collecting track, they've had trading cards, they've had the medallions, like we had, I think 3 of them had the coins. And obviously Star Tots is probably the most famous sort of giveaway on the collecting track. We've got the 50th anniversary coming up in a couple of years, and this might go down absolute gangbusters. Are you ready? Are you ready to do this again? You might have just landed on the new Star Tots. Are you ready to get into like an Empire wave?
Do you know what? I'd love to. Taking what I've learned from this time, I mean, if Chris or anybody wanted to do anything like that again, I think going into it for next time, I've got a much better idea of what we're doing. So if it ever happened again, I'd love to.
Where can people find you? I know people after hearing this are going to want to see this artwork that we keep talking. And this is a podcast. It's not the most visual medium of all. But where can people find you to learn a bit more about yourself?
Probably the easiest way if you're on Facebook is to look for my Facebook page, which is simply called Art of Dan Tearle. That's probably got my biggest reach, but you can also find me on Instagram just under Dan Tearle. I'm on X as well under RetroDan16. But yeah, Facebook is probably the best way to find me.
Fantastic. Well, I'm looking forward to finding you at Echo, and we'll definitely catch up then. Thanks for joining us, and really appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this special edition of Canon Fodder. For more Star Wars podcast content, be sure to subscribe to Fantha Tracks Radio on your podcatcher of choice. Subscribe to all our social media at links.fanthatracks.com. Be sure to be checking out fanthatracks.com daily for all your latest Star Wars news. And you can also join us live on YouTube for Good Morning Tatooine every Sunday evening at youtube.com/Fantha TV.
Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's Making Tracks.